certainly more than we would like, because this perverted concept of peace, which is completely devoid of the question of duration, stability, and justice, is now bobbing back and forth between East and West like a weaver's shuttle. And hand on heart, is it actually recognized in the collective memory that the first stone of the Berlin Wall was once cut at the Lenin shipyard in Danzig? Recognized that the much-praised policy of détente was based on increasing defense spending in West Germany's GDP, and of course, on the protective umbrella of NATO and on an American policy that forcefully showed the Soviet Union the limits of its expansionist power. I think it says a lot about the local forgetfulness of history, but again, in East and West, to deliberately suppress all this, and instead of continuing to indulge in nostalgic memories of the good Tsar Gorby, under whom the Kremlin did not drive up tanks and shoot at civilians. That is to say, on Bloody Sunday in Vilnius on January 13th, 1991, he did it after all, at one time when reunification had long since passed smoothly from the shadows and the now all Germans were able to indulge in their favorite hobby of being preoccupied with themselves and grumbling about whatever. For our and your freedom has been the Polish call since the 19th century. And it was understood by the civil rights activists in the GDR and of course by the people of Eastern Europe. And also later, during the democratic revolutions in Kiev, with the European flags in the hands of the demonstrators. Meanwhile, it seems that the contempt disguised as geopolitics and realpolitik that once spoke from the words of Egon Barth continues to have an effect today. Gerhard Schröder continues to be an unrepentant, grandiloquent friend of the mass murderer in the Kremlin, guaranteed by the new Secretary General of the Chancellor's Party that there is still room even for him in German social democracy. This, incidentally, to the equal horror of the Eastern Europeans and seasoned social democrats, which they repeatedly had to hear from the mouth of the then foreign minister. The NATO maneuvers on the eastern flank, to protect the democracies there were saber-rattling and warmongering. Saber-rattling and warmongering. Dear Mr. Federal President, and with all due respect and without any polite polemics, the Nord Stream 2 project, which the SPD and CDU held onto for so miserably long in the face of all well-founded criticism, was also only a bridge in this respect. Did it show your words from the spring of the year, in that it further encouraged Putin in his aggression, in his calculation that the Germans, otherwise world champions in moralizing, would not let the lucrative business go to waste, Ukraine or not. And again, the clairvoyant warnings in Eastern Europe had been ignored with considerable arrogance. And so it is now that threatened Eastern Europe has to bear the consequences in the near future, possibly even without American assistance. For our and your freedom. It is the tormented civilian population in Ukraine, just like the soldiers of the Ukrainian army, who are also trying to protect the freedom that has existed throughout Germany since 1989, with their resistance even now at this very moment and at unimaginable sacrifice. And no, those military and Eastern European scholars and the politicians in Germany, often so criminally isolated in their own parties, who think day after day about how the invaded country can be supported more appropriately than before, these dedicated men and women do not deserve to be denounced as caliber experts, suggesting that they are boisterous, trigger-happy troublemakers. Let's call a spade a spade. These are all more than verbal slips which are then dutifully retracted, since fatal thought patterns become visible here from the highest level and assertions are made, which then immediately diffuse into the public sphere and create additional confusion there. Especially now, 35 years after the fall of the wall, frequently and often rightly, there is talk of this or that deficit in the East. How about a debate at the same time, the deficit of knowledge, action, and honesty in the West, which must also be acknowledged and overcome? And not as a purely rhetorical exercise in penance, but as a necessary farewell to all German life lies and repressions, because these cost lives elsewhere in a very concrete and terrible way. In the above-mentioned 89th anniversary Leipzig concert by Wolf Biermann, the writer Jürgen Fuchs also spoke, who after being imprisoned by the Stasi and expatriated, was also able to return to the East for the first time. He then quoted the words of a Russian dissident, which are still as relevant today as ever. The truth is mild, it is radical, but also capable of forgiveness. However, justice and forgiveness are not possible before and outside the truth. Ladies and gentlemen, although some of you might have hoped for or expected a slightly different speech, I thank you for listening to me.